Day one was about getting to know each other and laying down some basics. Those of us who felt comfortable doing so built an altar with objects of meaning to us. And we found we were a very diverse group, with some people having worked on narratives for years and others just starting.
As a vision of what can be possible in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of developing the social technologies that can help us kind of re-skill for the transition that we are in the midst of.
The issues we work on were equally diverse, from racial justice to indigenous rights, environmentalism, gender justice, building new economies, academic research, journalism, and more. But what bound us together was that we were all interested in transition to a new system and the role that narrative could play. We finished the day with a talk by Jason Hickel on the history of how the forces of capitalism have forged the world we see around us today.
If we take a broader view, then what becomes clear is that the global economy has been designed over the course of the past 500 years in such a way as to benefit a handful of rich countries at the expense of most of the rest of the world.
Different symbols, new symbols. And what are the stories that we're going to tell about how we connect with each other? So for me, it's really locally, it's really around loving our neighbours, really, and being kind. And a lot of that is about care and thinking a lot about who is not here, who do we not see, who is invisible to us, and how can we care for them.
Day 2 began with a physical exercise to embody the idea of networks. We reached for the person who had brought us to the workshop to see and feel how connected our group was. Then, we went into social movements, defining what is network society and network movements, how do they work, what are their characteristics. From there, we graphed and analyzed data gathered around #growth to explain the behavior of conversation in the network space.
So I think that the non-linear organization communication of the network movement happened a lot in those months before the media started to pick it up.
And so I think, the work that I'm doing right now is really about what it means to exist as a society between virtual and physical realms. So what it means to be between the online and the offline, and how difficult a challenge it is to simultaneously strive for social change in our offline, physical, familiar world, while also having to grapple with this totally new frontier, the virtual, right?
And so if we look at the dualistic side, just looking at this ambiguous concept of nature, as we're looking at, if we look at the world right now, it's sometimes easier to look at the narratives. That's what we're familiar with all the time. It's like the regular things that you'll hear on a bus, and then sort of work backwards to see where they come from.
On day 3, we explored the global growth narrative in some more depth. Our network analysis found that the narrative terrain was diverse, with conversations about Brexit, GDP, and infrastructure projects in Nigeria and India. We analyzed the deep logics, metaphors, and frames in several case studies, and we concluded that the global growth framing is unwaveringly positive. We finished the day by setting the narrative intention to seed doubt on the global growth framing through radical narrative intervention.
And I come from a perspective where I find great comfort and also utility in going down to the smallest possible component parts of messages, of narratives, of narrative terrains, of conversations, and so on, and just see what those parts can tell us.
One way that I think about our work is that we support individuals to learn how to bear witness to their culture, to find enough space to read the currents, the narratives, the metaphors that are in their culture, like the conversation we had today about why is degrowth a difficult word? Because if you take some space, you can see how growth actually signifies life. And to be against growth puts you in a very difficult position. So it's how do we train people to read culture?
On Thursday night at the CHL, we facilitated a conversation on the role of animism within activist spaces. We discussed how activism would shift if we saw the universe as a living being that we are in dialogue with, including both animate and so-called inanimate aspects, such as thought forms. We explored our respective projects, issues, struggles from this lens and what it means to be an activist in troubled times, and how we can be faithful students to the culture of modernity in order to hack, recode, and translate post-capitalist narratives.
Start seeing these guys here. And then as Lucy was saying, the real thing that we're trying to do right now is once we have the network graph, we can integrate these things. So we can not only see topics, but we can also see the interactions.
A bunch of stuff in it as like a bag of those words. If that bag of words are all together in the same bag, then they're related.
Yeah, exactly. And then so the latent natural language processing, which is the one that we use for our topic model, assumes it starts with like a blank slate and looks through the text for word associations.
And it is, I mean, I suppose that like circles is something I'm trying to offer from maybe that space, but that's the sort of systemic place that I think a lot of this has led me to. And circles is a basic income.
And for the last step, we explored the power of creative translation, from the viralization of hip-hop culture to specific narrative interventions in Mexico. How creativity can amplify our messages, but at the same time, how important it is to create non-capitalist, non-patriarchal, and non-colonial communications. We created a map with different images and videos on the growth and post-growth, and we explored the possible roads to communicate and amplify some of the insights that were found in the growth conversation.
so you're just moving in, and it's just sort of like, you know, like.
A culture that is really based on trust and cooperation can arise, so where those things are not just the side effects of exciting projects, but where this is more the basis for anything we want to do.
Can you have marshmallows?
Friends, when gathered together, sing for the joy of singing. No matter what the weather, good friends when gathered together, good friends when gathered together, sing for the joy of singing. No matter what the weather, good friends when gathered together, good friends when gathered together, sing for the joy of singing. No matter what the weather, good friends when gathered together, good friends when gathered together, sing for the joy of singing.